Welcome to the Heart of Business podcast, sponsored by International Facilitators Organization. I'm your host, Mo Fatalbab. Today, our guest is Ahad Ghadimi, founder of Forums at Work and serial entrepreneur. Ahad, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you, Mo.
Great to have you with us. Where do we find you today?
Today, I'm in Toronto, Canada, where I grew up.
Oh, love Toronto. Wonderful. So I would imagine you got your entrepreneurial roots somewhere in Toronto. Where did it all begin? What got you inspired to do anything entrepreneurial, and when was it?
That's right. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. My both my parents are entrepreneurs. They had and they still have a successful restaurant and cafe chain here. And so my entrepreneurial education started at the dining table, in the car rides, in the restaurants on weekends and after school. That was sort of the MBA before I actually went to business school.
Amazing, amazing. And did they have you working alongside them as you were growing up?
That's right. Yes, I'm the eldest, and so it was yeah, I guess just natural that especially when we were new to Canada at the time, and so I was just always at the restaurant, and you're watching your parents work, and so you get behind the counter, you start cleaning tables and handing out receipts, when you're 5, 6 years old, and then also I think through like osmosis, right? Because you're always just listening to the discussions and to problems and to problem solving. And so it was just a very immersive childhood experience of sort of thinking like an entrepreneur.
Yeah, love it. So what was your first or next venture after that?
Um, oh gosh, I think that the first thing that I can, it's funny, the first thing I could think of is back when there were like, um, so when we used to use DOS, and you need to like
Oh,
have a
yeah.
list for DOS, and there's like the big floppy disk. I remember creating um, a program and selling it. So that was sort of the first thing. And then I guess I must have been like 10 or 11.
Oh my God.
Or even before that, actually, I'm just, going back into the mental archives. Yeah, at the end of the day, my parents would bring home, at the end of when you have cafes and pastry shops, you have the food at the end of the day. And so I'd ask them to bring stuff home, like the cinnamon buns and the chocolate croissants, and I'd go to school the next day and I'd sell them. So that was probably the most
Ah.
profitable business I ever had, because I had no cost of goods. And so I got 100% pure profit selling pastries to kids at school every day.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was just like a whole bunch of just wacky things. I remember there was one where these sort of personal alarm systems where you pull the thing and it makes an alarm sound, in case you get sort of attacked or mugged. And so I remember doing a presentation on that in the condo that I lived in. I think I must have been 12, 13 years old. So yeah, I guess there's always just been this natural propensity to um, find things that people wanted and just to fill that gap.
Love it. And so then where did you go to college and what did you study?
So I went to the University of Western Ontario. There's a great business school there called the Richard Ivey School of Business. And it's so the Ivey Business School is the second biggest case producer. So after Harvard, so it's a case
Of
studies school. And
course.
you prepare 3 cases, you go to class and you sort of battle it out and discuss it with your classmates. And actually, during that time, I started a business magazine called Up and Coming Business Journal. So it was a business
Hmm.
magazine. The It was like making business interesting, provocative, and engaging for business school students and young professionals. And so it gave me the opportunity, during business school, in undergrad to go and meet um, Jim Balsillie, who was the co-founder of Research in Motion, BlackBerry back then, which
Oh,
was
yes, yes, yes.
so I'd skip class and go and meet him, or Scudamore, the 1-800 Got Junk guy, or
Yeah.
Michael Bragman, who was like our own Howard Schultz, this, the big Second Cup founder here in Canada. So it was just this magazine that allowed, it was just really an outlet for me to be able to go and meet really brilliant people and then ask them unconventional questions that just sort of brought more of an interesting or an alternative perspective, a more colorful perspective, I guess, to business.
Love it. And were you one of these brainiac good students or one of these entrepreneur dropouts? Because, we see all flavors of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no, I managed to stay in school, but I was a lot more interested in getting out there and doing things. That was really so school was hard for me. I think I was an
Yeah,
unlikely student.
me too. Me too. That's why I
Really?
asked that question. Yeah, absolutely. It was hard for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was hard because I was surrounded by, the brilliant students who, would get 90s and say it was fun and easy. That was just not my experience. It took a tremendous amount of effort to just keep up and sort of be in that pack. So I can completely empathize with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So then after college, did you get a job or did you go say, I'm going to start a business?
I it's a bit of a crazy story, but I met a family in Toronto towards the end of my business school program. They had sort of pioneered the villa rental industry, so they were like the analog Airbnb, it's sort of and and we they were so fascinated by the magazine and the stuff that I was doing. And, long story short, the husband and I became really good friends. And he was married to a former Miss France.
Mm.
And so we ended up creating a high fashion swimsuit company.
Oh,
Um, they were living in Costa Rica, so we launched a high fashion swimsuit company called Vidal Sol out of Costa Rica. So I came up with this concept of putting most of sort of the designs of the swimsuit on the inside of the bikini. So it's like your own personal little secret. So it's just completely
oh,
unique concept at the time and very different, long before the years of social media. We got featured in all the big fashion magazine, including Sports Illustrated Swimsuit Edition. And so it was just one of those scenarios where a bit of an overnight success. It just kind of blew up very quickly. Um, and yeah, so we had a really great product and just a very unique story. And so that took me from Costa Rica, and then I moved to France to help sort of grow the business in the European market.
what a great story. Amazing. So did you end up, is that business still exist? Did you sell it? What was the exit?
Yep. So
And
so I
you don't have to tell us numbers. I'm just, what's the story now? Yeah.
Sure, yeah, yeah. So I stayed with the business for a few years, ended up so the whole idea was I was going to sort of start this uh for it was going to be like sort of the Miss France's business. That was sort of the whole idea that he was going to we're going to kind of get this going and she was going to run this business. So I sold my shares to the family and I ended up moving to Paris and getting a job with Dannon Yogurts and Waters. And
Hmm.
it was just kind of an unlikely. I got hooked up there with a former with an alumni from my business school,
Hmm.
and it's a very sort of different track, but definitely a life-changing moment because Dannon, especially at the time, I mean, this is like 2006. All they talked about was culture, and nobody spoke about culture back then. Nobody
Is
did.
that something to do with yogurt culture or
Right,
corporate
right. That
culture?
was the whole thing, right? Exactly. Like a probiotic culture, that bacteria culture. Yeah, no, I think maybe that's why there were such front runners on it. But uh, this is a company even from the 70s. They just thought a lot about this company's um, impact in society, and which is interesting because in French. the word for company in French is société,
Société, society.
society. Yeah. So for
Yeah.
them, it was like la rôle de la société uh, dans la société, like the role of a company in society. So they were such front runners of this
Wow.
uh, concept of um, inclusion, acceptance, diversity, people first. Like these are the stuff that we really spoke about, which today is, I guess, far more mainstream, but it was not the case back then. In my role, so I landed in this role of training manager, and so I was a global training manager for Dan, and so I worked with there are 110 countries, and so I worked all over the world with them, and what they had figured out was how to create a Dan culture. So whether you went to Egypt, I went to Cairo or Sao Paulo or the Czech Republic or Milan, when you were in the four walls of Dannon, it was you were in the Dannon universe, and people spoke the same way, engaged the same way, treated each other the same way, showed up to meetings prepared in a certain way. And so it was just this incredible education of that you can really hone and craft your own culture in an organization. You can curate it, you can design it, you can be very deliberate about it, versus saying, "Oh, well, this is Italy, and in Italy, this is like that's like
Mhm.
sort of the pervading culture." Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and I could throw out stereotypes here, but in Italy, people are like this, or in Brazil, they're like this, or in Germany, they're like this, and it's like, no, no. In the
No.
Dannon four walls, we're like this, and that is consistent all over the world.
How cool is that? Love it. So after Dannon, what happened next?
So, I think it's just that um, perhaps that entrepreneurial DNA. I
Yeah.
love being a Dan, and clearly, I'm still sort of an ambassador for the company. Um, but that entrepreneurial itch was really, really strong, and I wanted to really pursue it and just to get back at creating. And so I left Dan and continuing the same thread of sort of taking what I'd learned, so this this piece of culture and change management, within organizations. I got really lucky again and landed with a really renowned turnaround artist, a guy named George Michel, who was doing a turnaround at Boston Market. And at the time, Boston Market had just come out of, I believe, their second bankruptcy. He was like two or three. He was like the third CEO in a year and a half. And what was really incredible with George is that he's a strong believer in culture and creating a certain mentality and focusing on a culture change. And so we were just a really great match. And I got to support him and the organization to go from this culture of just surviving and just trying to like not collapse to like thriving. And so all those things that I learned at Dannon, I was able to sort of apply it there. And in doing so, and a lot of that sort of involved creating environments of safety where people can share ideas and, create a culture of non-judgment, psychological safety. These are sort of huge elements that I sort of took away from my time at Dannon. And what I noticed in
That is
doing,
ahead of its time, I gotta tell you. That's very much ahead of its time.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's even just clear for me thinking back to it, because before it was just like the
Yeah.
world that I lived in. And what's fascinating is look, I was just like, perhaps like my story sort of portrays, I was just not a corporate person. And so for me
Yeah.
to land in this place, feel so included, be able to create, to contribute so much, and still feel so, it's not often that people feel so passionate about companies that they worked for and continue waving that flag. All these, like, there's something about it that causes that affinity,
Yeah.
all these years later. And so yes, I very much credit Dannon for that education. I call it my master's degree in culture. Um, and I guess after it was sort of working on my PhD on culture. And so um, at Boston Market, there was this one moment, I'll never forget it, where what I just started seeing was that people, the employees, were starting to think and act like owners. They were starting to become entrepreneurial also. So they had taken personal ownership, and it's not because they had shares or there was an elaborate incentive scheme. They felt emotionally connected to what we were
Mm,
doing.
mm,
So whereas before, like before I arrived, they had laid off a third of the staff. And so when you lay off a third of the staff, that means everybody to the right of you is no longer there, right? So that puts everybody on edge. And so
mm,
you just don't want to be next on the chopping block. And so that was that culture of surviving. Let me just like not rock the boat.
yeah.
And so creating this culture of um, safety that we can try, because what we need to do is be innovative, try new things, make mistakes. Scared to do that in that environment, but that's what you need. So there's that. It's a weird dilemma.
Yeah.
But by doing that, it just created this like incredible buy-in from people where they were just like all in. Um, and I just watched with my own eyes that shift from people being so shell-shocked to just leaning so into this process and this concept of employee ownership and creating a culture of ownership. Um, that was sort of my first very experiential introduction to it.
So we're talking George Nadav, the founder of Boston Chicken, and the biggest IPO at the time, if I recall correctly, right?
Yeah, so the IPO was in, I believe it was in the 90s. And so
In the
this was
90s.
like, this was, I
This
think,
is,
some years later. So they were like a high flyer
yeah.
and then so it got too
And then
big
it,
and then it crashed exactly. And so when George Michel came in and took over, it was really about it was like, trying to save this crashing airplane
yeah.
and writing it. And so after that, uh, I was like, wow, this is so powerful. And around this time, I became aware of this phenomenon of retiring business owners, all these business owners that were sort of hitting retirement age. And so um, I started looking for companies that I could take over from retiring business owners and
Mm,
help transition to an employee ownership structure
mm,
because there is far more sellers than buyers, uh, and maybe a lot of people listening don't know this, but I think 80% of businesses that get put up for sale don't get sold. It's
mm,
quite hard for small businesses, medium sized, especially on the smaller side businesses to get sold. Talking like 10 to 50 employees. Um, and so I started looking for these businesses that I could take over and uh, and transition to employee ownership.
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so when did you start Forums at Work?
It was after I had done this a few times. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
now I've sort of I transitioned from consultant to CEO. One of
Yeah.
my thoughts was seeing the impact I'm having as a consultant, but often the the roadblocks or the hurdles to truly transforming a company is the owner and is the senior leadership as a CEO. The irony is often, especially when I was a consultant doing this, the CEO or the owner would hire you to, hey, and they'd have a long list of complaints and grievances about the leadership team, the employees, and I guess when I was earlier in my career, I'd hear this. I'm okay. So my goal is to change them, and then I realized, wait a second, like the issues stem from the top. I
Yeah.
mean, it's obvious now to me, but it wasn't back then. And then so I found that that was like a big part of my learning. And I thought, okay, I wonder if I can just uh if I was in that role, in that CEO role, could I drive change faster?
Mm,
If I was spending not all my time trying to like change the CEO, how do we drive change faster? And so that's when I was able to get some opportunities to lead companies, either in transition or, one of them was also a bankrupt company, manufacturing facility. And it was around this time that I joined YPO also. and became aware of this forum concept, this concept that you can get a group of people together, um, and by simply yet powerfully creating a very intentional structure that, okay, when we get together, we're going to finish and start on time. We're not going to share anything outside of this meeting. We're going to push to be more honest than we typically are. We're going to talk about our feelings, the good and the bad and the ugly. And we're going to take turns. Everyone's going to have the exact same amount of time to talk. We're going to be very structured about that. And experiencing that was just massively transformative for me. I just thought, like, I experienced how much more open, connected, supported I felt. And then, particularly given my background and training, my sort of knee-jerk reaction was, well, how do you bring this into to a company? And so I started doing that. I started bringing it, taking a company of a few hundred people, that I was leading, and breaking them down into little tribes, little groups that would meet regularly. And while in like a YPO forum, it's very sort of focused on yourself. You're talking about your personal business, your career, your family, your personal stuff. It's really centered on you. This was really more about learning groups. So getting groups that would learn together, discuss together. It was still about them sharing about themselves, but it wasn't about them bearing their souls to one another. It's just helping each other get to know each other better. And every time they'd meet, we'd have different discussions. Discussions could be around things like, how we can communicate better together, how we can support each other better, or how we can make product improvements better.
Yeah.
Find efficiencies better. But it was always in this sort of structure of everybody's equal, same amount of time to talk, and with a very focused theme. And so, having done that at my companies and just seeing how like dramatically successful it was, it just changed the way people interacted with one another, how people felt more connected to each other and therefore the company. After after so I had two exits in the same year, I was like, okay, like I just realized that I was just a lot more passionate and excited about the people, seeing people change, seeing people grow, and how that contributed to, like, how that had an outsized impact on the company than the actual product itself. And so I thought, I'm just going to focus on creating a tool where this could be more widely accessible. And so that's
So
our forms of work.
I love that. And I want to get into that because we have a very big shared mission. But before we get to our very big shared mission, you said your forum had a meaningful impact on you. Can you give us an example of one way, or if you can? I know it's all confidential, but it's about
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll speak about it for myself. Look, I remember my first forum meeting. I remember first hearing about this concept about a forum, and I feel silly almost now, like sharing my my reaction. But my question was like, all right, so should I just not to complain about like what, like, is that what this is really about? Because I just never had this model, I never had this idea of talking about what's your challenges, um, talking about how you felt about them. For me, I couldn't distinguish between that and complaining. And I was largely raised that you just put your head down and get to it and just get it done, and have like a can-do attitude. And what I realize is that they're not mutually exclusive. It's like you can't get help if you don't share where your challenges are. You there's parts of ourselves that are in a complete blind spot, and in having people that sort of know you and you share about yourself with regularly helps you identify those blind spots. And a part of that is sharing about yourself more, and letting people know more about you. So I'd say for me, I mean, there's been so many junctures where form has been really powerful, but I'd say it's just like understanding more about It's just actually developing this muscle of being more comfortable to share and more open to share.
Yeah.
That in itself was just a big blind spot, you know.
Yeah. It takes courage, which you have in
Thank
spades,
you.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, it's I think courage is like a muscle that you just keep building, and you build it by um taking that risk. You know, I think that's what it is of sharing, um and there are emotional risks, which sometimes, sort of feel like they have the most at stake. But I think that's why I just became so passionate about it, because I just saw the impact that it had on me, and also the impact that it had on others. You
Absolutely. Uh, so, Ahad, let's talk about our shared vision, mission, and our belief of what this can do to be transformative in this world.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, I'm public about this. It's on our website, and I say, I think that we need to have every human being in a forum or a peer group, whatever you want to call it. And to be more realistic, I think a billion people made more sense to me as a number that's achievable. And I think when you and I first met, you're like, "Oh my God, Mo, I've had the same vision." Is that right? Or was it slightly different?
It's spot on. And so I don't think I even told you this, but I left, like, I think it was a GLC, a GLC conference.
The Global
Uh,
Leadership Conference, where they
that's
train
right.
chapter officers for YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization, for those that haven't heard previous episodes. And to be a member, you have to be under 50, join by 45, and have at least 15 million in sales and 50 employees. And those numbers can be higher in some chapters that are more exclusive, but that's basically the minimum. So
Correct.
just so everybody knows what organization you are referring to and you joined. So please continue.
Yeah. And so I jumped into a cab with another member. We're both going to the airport. We got to talking, and I shared that's what I'm that my vision, that, what do you do, and I talked about the billion, and he says, well, I know someone else who wants to put a billion people in forums, and that's when he told me about you, and that's when I reached
Oh
out.
my God, who was
Uh,
it?
um, I don't recall his name,
Okay, you'll
actually.
have to let me know.
Yeah.
Wow,
I remember.
amazing.
I believe he was from Washington, but I don't remember his name right now. But it was just, we were like, there was no cabs. He got into one. He goes, "Hey, if you're going to the airport, we can ride together." And but it was just, I was thinking about this before we got on today, how we just got connected. And so there's
We're united by a number
absolutely, and by a vision. And when I
and
hear
a
you say
vision.
that, when I hear you talk about your views, I just feel so strongly about it. And the thing is Mo, I I can't look away. Like, I've
Yeah.
this past year we've put hundreds of people in peer learning forums in Africa, in West Africa, people in manufacturing, tech, insurance, retail, and it's consistently the same thing: how their confidence grows, how their sense of self grows, how their family lives change, how their how people around them tell them that they're like different, and they just seem more confident and better, and how they then how they feel everybody should have this. And so I just think it's so, when you see that, and we've just in the last year, from have launched that in Turkey, in Manila, we've done it in South America, across the United States. Okay, when you see how universal it is across industries, across cultures, from senior leadership right down to factory floor,
Yeah.
steel welders in Mexicali or El Centro, California, right down the border of Mexico and California, who have been in these sort of workplace peer learning forums, and I've spoken to them. I say, so what's this like? And they're like, like, I feel a lot more connected to the people I work with. I like being here. I'm growing, I'm learning, and you see that excitement that you and I feel both share. And so you realize that, yeah, it's like there's a reason why you and I feel so strongly about this. There's a very concrete, tangible reason.
It's really a crime that the world does not know about this. My first book in 2008, Forum, The Secret Advantage of Successful Leaders. Why did I title it The Secret Advantage? Because in my world in 2008, it was just CEOs. And it was many CEOs around the world, right? At that point, I'd already worked with CEOs in YPO and EO and in over 30 countries. And yet it's still a secret. And today, I think the secret's starting to come out. So that's our job, my friend. We got to let people know that their lives will be better in every measurable way and in some very immeasurable ways, right? As a result of belonging to a forum that works following this model that we've known and loved for so long. And it's really the model that makes it work, I think, because we're not taught to not give advice as we're growing up. We're not taught not to be so judgmental with a facial expression or with, here's what I think you should do with your life. We're not taught to be vulnerable. We're in fact taught to be invulnerable, to protect ourselves and to not show our emotions, and big boys don't cry. And so to have this incredible outlet gives us so much space to learn, to grow, and to get things off our chests.
Beautifully said. I mean, it's so refreshing to hear you say this and describe it, because you say it with such similar words and similar passion, and that I feel, and to hear you say it, and someone with just the breadth of experience that you have and the impact that you've made is so reaffirming. I think it's like one of those things where you're right. It is. You said it's a crime, and you said it's a secret, and I agree with all those things. I think in terms, and I know in my bones that one day um, there will be justice, and everybody will have an opportunity to join a peer group, um, and there will be it will no longer be a secret, and it'll be so widely known. And I think it'll be one of those things where people will be like, well, how did people survive without this? I mean, when they did it, it just kind of just suffered, in isolation. And it's like, well, that makes no sense. It's like, yeah, well, it did it, and so I just know that's going to happen. Um, and we'll look back on, conversations like this, and think, and just sort of see the before and after. And so I'm just so thrilled to have met you, because if you think about it, in uh, by definition, it's important to like come together to create this for everybody. And you can't do this alone. If you
No.
bring a billion people together to create sort of a different operating model with which people communicate. Because now I'm incapable of giving advice
Right?
unless he asks for it,
Yeah,
right?
even then I struggle. So, Ahad, let me ask you this. So, we got a billion people in forums
Right.
through whatever mechanism they need, whatever mechanism that works for them, virtual, in person, whatever. But we've got a billion people that are living by this culture, are living by this ethos that we so hold dearly. And I remember the days when we started forums at Google. We started 12 groups for underrepresented minorities. And what was very clear early on is they loved these groups and evaluations were incredibly high. And they said, we love the culture of these peer groups. How can we make that the culture of Google itself? Of course, we didn't reach enough people to have that impact. But when you insist that every member of the company gets to participate, that changes things, doesn't it? I think you have a story about that.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'll share an example, actually, another tech company. So one of our clients, they've been running these peer learning forums within their company for years now, and it became just like what you described with Google. It was voluntary first, and then it kept growing, and then it became, no, this is who we are. And then now they call their groups Heartbeat. So this is their heartbeat, and they have a
I
heartbeat
love that.
mural, and they have heartbeat T-shirts, and it's just this is part of their heartbeat. And
Wow. That's
and
beautiful.
and what happened was so, someone had joined the company, and I guess they had fallen through the cracks, but they weren't put into one of these groups.
Yeah.
And they started having friction with some. There were a salesperson with some of the operational people, and that happens, right? Sales and operation. The operation sales sometimes calls operation the anti-sales department, right? And so they're having this friction, and eventually this salesperson storms into the CEO's office and is complaining and is frustrated, and he just like he was just listening to her. This is a great YPR and a great advocate of forums in the workplace. And he said, wait a second, are you in a heartbeat group? She's like, no, they were supposed to put me in one like a month ago and they just still haven't. He's like, that's what's going on. She just had not become part of a group. So she was not communicating the way everybody else. She was part, like, there was like two cultures. There's the people who were part of this, who were communicating, listening, understanding one another, were because they meet weekly in these groups. So when you do that, you're building a muscle, a communication muscle, a way of being together. And she was just not part of that. So she was still kind of doing it her own, or like, so she's still like an outsider, actually.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it really showed that the sort of difference and disparity when you become part of this and you're regularly meeting, building relationships, practicing this style and form of communication, and then when you're not, so that's why it's so important that, because what happens is the people that are in it always consistently, they love it, they're engaged, they change, they transform the way that they listen and communicate. And then when you have people who aren't, then you have sort of haves and have nots, and then you start having two very different types of cultures.
Love that. I love that. Ahad, what an amazing, amazing story you've had, and what an amazing impact we are going to have. I cannot wait to figure out ways for us to join forces to really make a difference. I want to end with one last question. One person that's had the most impact on your life.
I would say my mother has had
Mm,
sort of the biggest impact on my life, and I think it's because she's just always been a safe place for me to go and talk to. I mean, I think I've really never truly been alone because I've just always had her to go and talk to and be myself with. So she offered me that space and that opportunity, and continues to do so. So yeah, I feel super lucky.
uh, my spine is tingling, my friend. My mother is my biggest cheerleader. Always has been, no matter what. So right there with you. Love to our mothers.
Yes, love to our mothers, and yeah, we're really lucky to have that and to have our mothers around and to still be able to benefit from that type of really unique love.
Yes, I love it. We'll end it there. Thank you so much, Ahad. You can follow the Heart of Business podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, podcast reviews have a real impact on our visibility. So if you like today's episode, please give us a review. Finally, you can listen to all our episodes at our website, internationalfacilitators.com. Thank you for listening and have a great day.